The velvet box was cold in my hand, heavier than it should be, yet strangely light. The weight of absence. I didn't need to open it. My fingers knew the contours, the specific way it usually clicked shut. And I knew, even before my thumb pushed the clasp, that it would be empty. The sapphire pendant, the one my grandmother wore on her wedding day.
Gone.
The silence in the house wasn't quiet. It roared. It screamed of violation, of something precious being ripped away not by a stranger in the night, but by the man who slept beside me. The man who promised forever. The emptiness of the box was a physical manifestation of the emptiness that was starting to hollow out my chest. My breath hitched, a tiny, painful sound in the echoing house. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, oblivious to the fact that my world had just tilted off its axis. It felt unreal, like standing in a familiar room, but the floor is no longer solid. If you've ever felt something shatter, felt the ground disappear, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. And please, if my stories resonate, subscribe. It helps me feel less alone bringing them to you. Life before the cold box, before the silence that screamed felt like a warm, steady current. We had built this life together, brick by patient brick, over 15 years. 15 years of shared mornings, of navigating the mundane currents of bills and chores, of celebrating small victories and comforting each other through the inevitable losses. He was my anchor, the quiet strength I leaned on. We weren't the fiery romance from the movies. We were something deeper, I thought. A comfortable, worn-in love, like a favorite sweater. Predictable in the best possible way. Safe. My jewelry wasn't just gold and stones. It was time-cataloged in glittering form. The delicate silver locket my parents gave me for my 16th birthday, holding miniature, faded photos of their younger selves. The pearl earrings he bought me on our 5th anniversary, their luster catching the light just so. The simple gold chain I wore every day, a constant, comforting weight against my skin. And the sapphire pendant. That was the crown jewel, not in monetary value perhaps, but in legacy. It had been passed down through generations of women in my family, a symbol of resilience, of enduring love. It felt less like an object and more like a guardian, a piece of my history resting against my heart. I kept it and the few other truly significant pieces in a small, antique wooden box given to me by my mother, tucked away in the back of a drawer. Safe. Or so I believed. Our days fell into a rhythm I cherished. Early morning coffee together, the quiet rustle of newspapers, or the shared scrolling on phones. Work days that were separate but bridged by texts, by the anticipation of coming home. Evenings cooked together or ordered in, easy conversation that drifted from the day's frustrations to plans for the weekend, for retirement, for futures stretching out, seemingly endless and shared. We talked about renovating the kitchen, about potential travel destinations years down the line, about growing old together in this house, the one we had made our home. There was a profound sense of peace in the ordinariness of it all. A deep-seated trust that permeated everything, like the scent of brewing coffee in the morning air. I trusted him with my heart, my future, my vulnerabilities. Why would I not trust him with a few boxes of metal and stone? They were mine, yes, but they were safe within our shared space, guarded by the implicit promise of us. The first crack was small, almost imperceptible, like a hairline fracture in glass. A late night at work became 2, then 3 in a row. Reasonable excuses, delivered with just enough detail to sound plausible. A big project. Tight deadlines. I didn't question it. Work happens. I left him dinner, sent him texts wishing him luck. Played the supportive wife. My only complaint was the quiet house, the missing weight of him beside me in bed. A minor inconvenience, I thought. A temporary disruption to the rhythm. Then came the little things. A new cologne, sharper, more modern than his usual scent. A sudden, almost frantic attention to his appearance, hitting the gym, buying clothes that were slightly too youthful for him. He dismissed it as wanting to get healthier, to look good for me. And I, so ready to believe, smiled and told him he already looked perfect. The texts that came in late, quickly hidden or deleted. The phone always face down. The subtle withdrawal. The way a touch lingered less. A gaze met mine for a shorter time. These were whispers at first, easily rationalized away by a mind desperate to maintain the status quo. Stress, I told myself. Midlife jitters. Anything but the truth that was slowly, inexorably, gathering itself in the shadows. The decision to hire a private investigator wasn't a sudden, dramatic act born of certainty. It was a surrender, a giving in to the gnawing, relentless suspicion that had burrowed its way into my gut and refused to leave. It was the result of sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations, analyzing every look, every missed beat. It was the culmination of finding a receipt for a dinner for two at a restaurant he hadn't taken me to, tucked deep in his coat pocket. It was the cold dread that washed over me when he flinched away from my touch, as if I had burned him. Finding an investigator felt illicit, like something out of a bad movie. I researched names online, feeling absurdly paranoid, deleting my browser history like a criminal. I finally settled on a firm, small and discreet, recommended on a seemingly innocuous local forum. Making the call was one of the hardest things I've ever done. My voice trembled as I explained, euphemistically at first, my concerns. The woman on the other end, professional and calm, listened without judgment. She had heard it all before, her tone suggested. A weary understanding that was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because I wasn't alone in this nightmare. Terrifying because it meant the nightmare was likely real. Meeting the investigator, a man named Arthur, was strangely anticlimactic. He looked nothing like the trench-coated figures of my imagination. He was quiet, unassuming, with sharp, observant eyes behind sensible glasses. We met in a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop miles from my home. I laid out my scattered suspicions, the late nights, the new clothes, the guarded phone, the dinner receipt. Arthur listened patiently, nodding occasionally, taking sparse notes. He didn't offer platitudes or fuel my paranoia. He simply outlined the process, the cost, the likelihood of finding something. He used careful, neutral language. Documentation, he called it. Gathering information, it felt clinical, distant from the raw, bleeding wound inside me. But his calm demeanor, his lack of emotional investment, was exactly what I needed. A steady hand in the swirling chaos of my mind. I hired him, signed the papers, handed over a retainer that made my stomach clench. It felt like paying someone to confirm the worst thing imaginable. But the alternative, living in this suffocating cloud of doubt and suspicion, was no longer survivable. The investigation began quietly, a ghost moving in the background of my increasingly fragile life. The investigation was a slow, agonizing drip feed of confirmation. Each report from Arthur was another drop of poison, steadily filling the cup of my already overflowing dread. He confirmed the late nights weren't spent at the office. He provided timestamps, locations, hotels, restaurants, addresses. The cold, hard data didn't lie. He had a routine. Leaving work, meeting her sometimes for a few hours, sometimes overnight. Her name appeared, a name I didn't know, a stranger who was dismantling my life piece by piece. He sent discreet photos. Grainy, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. My husband, walking hand in hand with another woman. Laughing, touching, intimate in a way he hadn't been with me in months. Seeing the photos felt like being punched. Not a quick jab, but a deep, bruising impact that left me breathless and aching. It wasn't just the act of infidelity. It was the casualness of it, the apparent joy he found in it. The life he was building with her mirrored the life we had built, but shiny and new and stolen. I cried at first, deep, wrenching sobs that shook my entire body. But the tears eventually dried up, replaced by a cold, hard nod of something else. Not just sadness. Something sharper. He didn't seem to notice the change in me. Or perhaps he didn't care. He was distracted, preoccupied. His lies became bolder, told with an easy charm that made my skin crawl. He'd come home, smelling faintly of her perfume, making up stories about traffic or a sudden late meeting. And I would listen, sometimes nodding, sometimes asking a pointed question just to see him stumble. He always recovered, smooth and practiced. It was like watching a performance, a terrible play where I already knew the ending. The house felt stifling, filled with his lies and my pretense. We were living parallel lives under the same roof, strangers sharing a bed. The first piece of jewelry I noticed missing wasn't the sapphire. It was a small, antique silver locket. It had belonged to my grandmother, a tiny, tarnished thing I rarely wore but cherished deeply. I looked for it one morning, planning to wear it for sentimental reasons. I checked the antique box. Not there. I searched the drawer, the top of the dresser, everywhere I could think of. Nothing. I felt a prickle of unease. It wasn't valuable to anyone but me. Could I have misplaced it? Forgotten where I put it? I told myself it must be around somewhere. Then, a week later, I went to find the pearl earrings he gave me for our anniversary. They weren't in their usual spot in the box either. My heart started to pound. I pulled the whole box out, rummaged through the tissue paper. The empty spaces screamed louder than any alarm. The locket, the earrings, a gold bracelet my mother gave me, a small diamond pendant that was my first real piece of jewelry as a teenager. Several pieces were gone. Not the most valuable, not yet, but precious. Irreplaceable in their own way. My mind immediately went to the worst-case scenarios. Burglary? But nothing else was disturbed. And why only certain pieces? A slow, horrifying possibility began to form. Could he have taken them? It seemed unthinkable. Why? For what purpose? He had access to our joint account. Why steal from me? I confronted him, trying to keep my voice steady. Have you seen my silver locket? Or the pearl earrings? I can't find them. He didn't meet my eyes. He was engrossed in his phone, scrolling. No, honey. Are you sure you didn't just misplace them? I've looked everywhere. They were in my jewelry box. He finally looked up, a flicker of impatience in his eyes. Well, they must be somewhere. Maybe they fell out? Try looking again. He offered no help, no concern. Just a dismissive wave of his hand, and went back to his phone. His lack of reaction was a new kind of pain. Not just the potential theft, but the absolute indifference. He didn't care that my cherished possessions were missing. It confirmed a chilling detachment. I didn't press it further then. The dread was too overwhelming. I felt like I was drowning, the water rising higher and higher. Arthur's reports continued, documenting the affair. His texts to her, filled with endearments he no longer used with me. Their plans. Their complaints about their respective lives, our life, his life with me was something to be complained about. The emotional distance solidified into an icy wall. I was living with a stranger who wore my husband's face. The missing jewelry became a relentless internal obsession. I checked the box every day, my heart sinking with each empty space. Another piece gone. A small gold ring. A pair of delicate silver hoops. He was systematically emptying the box. The monetary value was growing, piece by piece. But the emotional value being stripped away felt immeasurable. Each missing item was a memory stolen, a history erased. Why was he doing this? The questions circled endlessly in my mind. Then Arthur sent a report that stopped me cold. He had been tracking my husband's financial activity, looking for anything unusual. He found a series of transactions. Online sales. To various buyers. Descriptions like antique silver locket, pearl earrings, gold bracelet. My blood ran cold. He wasn't just taking them. He was selling them. My jewelry. Our shared history. My grandmother's legacy. Being sold off. And for what? Arthur's report provided the horrifying answer. He had cross-referenced the sale dates with other expenses. Dinners. Hotel stays. Gifts. The money from selling my jewelry was funding his affair. Funding his life with her. It was a betrayal so deep, so vile. It felt almost surreal. Not only was he breaking his vows, not only was he lying and sneaking, but he was financing it with pieces of my soul, items that held decades of my family's love and history. The cheapness of it, the sheer transactional nature of using my heirlooms to pay for clandestine dinners, was breathtakingly cruel. The dread transformed into a cold, simmering rage. This wasn't just about a broken marriage anymore. This was about theft, about a calculated violation of trust that went beyond the emotional. This was concrete proof of his deceit, his disregard. The jewelry box wasn't just being emptied, it was being looted to pay for my own destruction. Arthur noticed the financial desperation too. Selling off personal items, especially things that weren't obviously liquid assets like stocks or bonds, suggested he might be running into money issues, or perhaps squirreling away cash that wouldn't be easily traced in our joint accounts. This shifted the focus of the investigation. It wasn't just about documenting the affair for divorce proceedings anymore. It was about documenting financial malfeasance, theft, using marital assets, my personal assets, to fund an extramarital affair. This changed everything. It wasn't just adultery, it was fraud. "This puts a different spin on things," Arthur said during our next discreet meeting. We were in a park, sitting on separate benches, pretending to read. His voice was low, calm, almost academic. "Selling your personal property without your knowledge or consent, and using the proceeds. That's significant, especially given the context." He explained how this evidence could be used, not just as proof of the affair, but as proof of his character, his dishonesty, and potentially impact the financial settlement in the divorce. It painted a picture of a man actively working to deceive and defraud his wife. But how to best use it? The online sales were traceable to him, but proving the jewelry was mine, that he didn't have a right to sell it, could be tricky. Especially if he claimed I gave it to him, or that it was joint property. "We need to document these sales definitively," Arthur said. "And, ideally, link them directly to his spending on the affair." "But he's selling them to random people online," I said, my voice tight. "How do we even know who's buying them?" Arthur was quiet for a moment, observing the ducks on the pond. "Sometimes," he said, turning his gaze back to me, "if we know something is going to be sold, and it's particularly valuable as evidence, we can ensure it lands in the right hands." His meaning wasn't lost on me. He was suggesting he, or someone connected to him, could become a buyer. It felt extreme, like something out of one of those movies I'd thought of earlier. But the idea took root. It wasn't just about catching him anymore. It was about building an irrefutable case. It was about not just surviving the inevitable divorce, but coming out of it with my dignity and my financial security intact. It was about turning his cowardly, calculated theft into his undoing. A cold resolve settled over me. The sadness hadn't disappeared, but it was now layered with a hard, unyielding determination. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a strategist, and my jewelry, his stolen goods, would become my weapon. Then he took the sapphire pendant. The absence of that specific piece in the box hit me with a physical blow. It wasn't just an item. It was a piece of my lineage, a tangible connection to the women who came before me. Selling that felt like selling a part of my soul. It was an act of ultimate disrespect, a deliberate severing of my ties to my own history, funded by his infidelity. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. I checked the online marketplaces Arthur had been monitoring with a frantic energy I hadn't felt before. My hands shook as I scrolled. And there it was. A listing. Anonymous seller, but the photo, there was no mistaking it. The unique setting, the specific hue of the stone. My grandmother's sapphire pendant. Listed for sale. The asking price felt insulting, a paltry sum for something so steeped in personal history. I sent the listing to Arthur immediately, a one-word email. Him. His reply came back swiftly. On it. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and anticipation. Arthur kept me updated. He had made contact with the seller. Expressed interest. He was negotiating. It was a delicate dance, needing to seem like a genuine buyer, without raising suspicion. He needed proof of ownership, documentation that would tie the sale definitively back to my husband. He needed the transaction to be recorded, verified. Meanwhile, living with my husband felt like walking on eggshells across a minefield. He was jumpy, irritable. The stress of his double life, coupled perhaps with the secrecy of his illicit sales, was getting to him. He lashed out at me over minor things, accused me of being distant, cold. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. He was the one systematically dismantling our life, selling off pieces of me, and he had the audacity to accuse me of being distant? I bit back the furious retorts that clawed at my throat. Now was not the time. I needed to maintain the facade. The colder I seemed, the less likely he might be to suspect I was onto him, that I knew about the sales, that I knew about her. But the mask was getting harder to wear. Every time he looked at me, every time he spoke a casual lie, I saw the betrayer, the thief. I saw the man who had reduced my history to a price tag to fund his sordid affair. The weight of his deceit pressed down on me, suffocating. There were moments I felt utterly alone, consumed by the knowledge, unable to share it fully with anyone. Even Arthur, professional and efficient, was just a conduit for information, not a confidant for the crushing emotional burden. Arthur confirmed the sale of the sapphire. He was the buyer, using a carefully constructed alias, a separate bank account. He had the pendant. More importantly, he had the transaction details. The seller's information, which linked back undeniably to my husband. The date and time of the sale. The amount. The evidence was concrete, irrefutable. My grandmother's pendant, bought back by my own private investigator, was now the smoking gun. It wasn't just an affair anymore. It was theft. It was fraud. It was his undoing. The relief that washed over me was profound, but short-lived. It was immediately replaced by a surge of pure, icy determination. The waiting was over. The time for acting like a passive victim was past. It was time to confront him, not with tears or accusations, but with the cold, hard truth, backed by evidence he couldn't deny. Filing for divorce wasn't a heartbroken submission. It was a strategic move. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Eleanor, understood immediately the power of the evidence Arthur had gathered. The affair itself was grounds for divorce, but the financial malfeasance, the theft and sale of my personal property to fund it, elevated the case significantly. It wasn't just about dividing assets. It was about accountability, about demonstrating a pattern of deceit and financial misconduct that could impact everything from spousal support to the division of shared property. We didn't lead with the jewelry. That was the final blow, the twist we held back. Eleanor built the case methodically, presenting Arthur's findings about the affair, the hotel stays, the texts, the photos. My husband, blindsided by the sheer volume and detail of the evidence, floundered. He tried to deny, to minimize, to paint me as paranoid, jealous. He had clearly underestimated me. He thought I was oblivious or too weak to fight back. He didn't know about Arthur. He didn't know I had been building my own case, piece by painful piece. He sat across from me in the mediation room, his lawyer looking increasingly uncomfortable. He seemed smaller, his usual arrogance replaced by a nervous energy. He admitted to some mistakes, to a brief indiscretion, trying to frame it as a marital issue, something we could have worked on if only I hadn't been so cold. The gaslighting was almost impressive in its audacity, but it fell flat in the face of Arthur's meticulous reports, dating back months, detailing a deliberate, ongoing affair. Then Eleanor brought up the missing jewelry. I watched his face carefully. A flicker of surprise, then a smooth attempt at dismissal. "My wife misplaces things," he told his lawyer, loud enough for us to hear. "She's always losing things." Eleanor calmly presented the evidence of the online sales, the listings, the communication with buyers, the money deposited into accounts only he had access to. He started to sweat. He stammered, tried to claim he was selling some of his old things, things he didn't need anymore. He tried to argue the jewelry wasn't that valuable, just costume pieces. A direct insult to my family's history, to the pieces he had stolen. "And this item?" Eleanor asked, her voice cutting through his weak excuses. She held up a photograph. A clear, high-resolution image of the sapphire pendant. The one from the online listing. He froze. His eyes went wide. The color drained from his face. He stared at the photo, then at me, then back at the photo. He knew that pendant. He knew what it meant to me. He knew he had stolen and sold it. He had clearly believed that transaction, perhaps because it was the most significant piece, was untraceable, lost in the anonymity of online sales. That's not mine, he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. It was a desperate, flailing lie. Eleanor didn't smile. Her expression was utterly devoid of emotion. Actually, it is, she said. Or rather, it was yours to sell. Temporarily. She paused, letting the confusion register on his face. He looked genuinely bewildered. Because the buyer of this specific piece, Eleanor continued, her voice clear and precise, was my client's private investigator. He purchased it directly from you, Mr. Husband's last name, via an online marketplace transaction on date. We have the full transaction history, the account details, and a signed affidavit from Mr. Arthur Sterling detailing the purchase on my client's behalf, specifically for the purpose of securing evidence of your theft and financial misconduct. The heir left the room. His jaw dropped. He stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief, then fury, then a dawning, terrible understanding. He wasn't just caught. He was caught by the very person he had betrayed, using his own criminal act as the instrument of his downfall. The PI wasn't just watching, the PI was actively participating, turning his illegal act into irrefutable evidence. He had sold my family heirloom, my grandmother's legacy, to the man building the case against him. The irony, the sheer, perfect, devastating irony, was not lost on me. He had thought he was so clever, so careful. Selling the jewelry piecemeal, through anonymous online platforms, pocketing the cash. He thought he was getting away with it, funding his new life with stolen pieces of my old one. He never imagined I knew, that I was watching, and that I would use his own avarice and deceit to trap him. He was utterly blindsided. The confidence, the arrogance he walked in with, evaporated in an instant. He was exposed. A common thief, caught red-handed, his hand literally in the jewelry box. His lawyer scrambled, whispering urgently to him. But there was nothing to say. The evidence was concrete. The transaction, the item, the link back to him, the stated purpose of the purchase by RPI. It was a level of proof he couldn't wriggle out of. The sapphire pendant, meant to be a symbol of enduring love and family, had become the ultimate weapon of his destruction. It was, in a twisted, deeply satisfying way, poetry. The mediation room, moments before thick with tension and his confident lies, became heavy with his stunned silence, his sputtering disbelief. The power dynamic shifted completely. I wasn't the wronged wife hoping for justice. I was the woman who had systematically gathered the evidence and outmaneuvered him, using his own actions against him. The look on his face, the pure, unadulterated shock and realization of how completely he had been trapped, was a sight I will carry with me forever. It wasn't just about the divorce anymore. It was about vindication. A cold, hard, deeply satisfying vindication. The divorce went through. Swiftly. Once his lawyers saw the full extent of the evidence related to the financial misconduct, the court took a dim view of his actions. He didn't just have to divide the marital assets, he faced consequences for the theft and the use of those funds. The settlement was more than fair, reflecting not just the division of property built over 15 years, but also accounting for the financial impact of his deceit. Arthur returned the sapphire pendant to me, holding it again after everything was strange. It carried the weight of its history, yes, but also the weight of this battle, this victory. It wasn't just my grandmother's pendant anymore. It was a symbol of my resilience, my ability to fight back, to not just survive but to strategically dismantle the threat that had sought to destroy me. The other pieces of jewelry he had sold off were gone forever, scattered to various buyers online. There was a pang of sadness for those lost memories, but it was overshadowed by the fact that the most significant piece had been recovered and had played such a crucial role in his downfall. Its monetary value felt irrelevant now. Its true value was the story it now carried, the evidence it provided, the leverage it gave me. Walking away from that marriage, from that life, was like emerging from a long, suffocating tunnel. The air felt sharper, the colors brighter, but there was also the lingering dust of the collapse. The trust was shattered, not just in him, but a fundamental crack in my belief in predictability, in safety. But in its place, something else had grown. A fierce, quiet confidence in my own strength, my own ability to navigate treacherous waters. I hadn't just reacted. I had planned, I had fought, and I had won. Not in a way that felt triumphant or joyful, but in a way that felt necessary, cleansing. The house felt different afterwards. Lighter, despite the empty spaces where his presence used to be. It was mine now, truly mine, built brick by brick, not just by us, but now redefined by my own survival, my own reclaiming. The future stretched out, uncertain but no longer bound by his lies, his secrets, his betrayals. It was a future I would build myself, piece by careful piece, on a foundation of hard-won knowledge and self-reliance. The scar tissue remains. The memory of the cold, empty jewelry box, the feel of betrayal, the corrosive doubt. But it's a scar that reminds me not of the wound, but of the healing, of the strength it took to close it. And sometimes I take out the sapphire pendant. I hold it, tracing the familiar lines of the setting. And I remember the betrayal, the struggle, the cold strategy, and the moment his world came crashing down, brought low by the very thing he stole. It's not a memory I cherish, but it's one that fuels me. It reminds me that even in the darkest moments, even when you feel stripped bare, you still possess the power to fight back, to reclaim what is yours, and to turn the perpetrator's own actions into the instruments of their justice. Walking away from that, it changes you, but it also shows you who you really are. If you've ever had to rebuild your life, brick by painful brick, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life.